So today we're going to dig into this really powerful idea. It's a bit of a downer, honestly, but it has this incredibly dramatic name, the tragedy of the commons.
It all really boils down to a question we've probably all asked ourselves at some point. Why do the things that belong to all of us, like a public park, or the air we breathe, or even fish in the ocean, why do they so often get trashed, polluted, or just completely used up? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we've got to start with a really simple story.
Okay, so picture this with me. Imagine a perfect green pasture. It's lush, it's wide open, just teeming with life. The absolute perfect place for animals to graze.
Now here's the kicker. This pasture, it doesn't belong to any one person. It's a common resource. It's open for everyone in the village to use, totally free. And that's where our story really gets going.
So, look, this story about a field, it's really a stand-in for a much, much bigger problem that affects all of us. It's all about that classic tension, right? The battle between what's good for me right now versus what's good for all of us down the road. And believe me, this imbalance shows up everywhere, from our neighborhood parks all the way up to the global climate.
And this whole pasture problem, it actually has a name. The theory that explains it is called the tragedy of the commons. It's this really powerful way of looking at why these shared things we all rely on so often get pushed right to the edge.
So the tragedy part is that it's a total paradox. It's what happens when every single person makes a decision that is completely rational and logical for them. But when you add up all those perfectly logical choices, you get a complete disaster for the whole group. It's this head-on collision between individual, short-term gain and the group's long-term survival. Okay, so let's break down the logic here, because this is where it gets really interesting. If I'm a herder, adding just one more cow to the pasture makes perfect sense for me. Why? Because the benefit, all the profit from that extra animal, that's all mine. But the cost? Well, the pasture gets a tiny bit more grazed, and that cost is shared by everyone. The big problem, of course, is that every other herder is thinking the exact same way. And suddenly, all these seemingly rational decisions pile up into one totally irrational outcome, a ruined pasture.
Yeah, this really lays out the core conflict, doesn't it? The gain for the individual is right here, right now, and it's all for them. But the loss for the group? It's spread out, it's delayed, it's that tiny, almost invisible piece of damage that, when you multiply it by everyone doing the same thing, well, it turns into a complete catastrophe.
But wait a second, is this tragedy just inevitable, like a law of nature? Is every shared resource just doomed to fail? Well, not so fast. Turns out, the answer is not necessarily. And in fact, the original theory gets a lot of criticism because it kind of forgets about one really, really important thing: the power of community and the rules that communities create.
And this is the key counterargument right here. The problem isn't the commons itself. For centuries, people have successfully managed shared stuff. The real problem kicks in when the social fabric unravels, when the rules and traditions that govern how we share just fall apart.
You can see it laid out really clearly here. When a community has strong social rules, clear boundaries, a way to keep an eye on things, methods for sorting out disagreements, resources can be used sustainably for, generations. A great example is how Swiss villagers have managed their communal alpine meadows for ages. But when those rules break down, maybe because of outside forces or new laws or a sudden boom in population, that's when the tragedy happens. So get this, it's not the lack of private ownership that's the issue, it's the lack of rules.
All right, let's fast forward to today. The tragedy often plays out a little differently now. It's not always because social rules disappear, but because a shared resource has, zero value in our economic system. And what's the ultimate example of a shared resource that we don't put a price tag on? Yep, the very air we all breathe.
Think about it for a second. What's the market price for dumping a ton of industrial smoke into the atmosphere? It's zero, a big, fat nothing. A factory that uses the air like a garbage dump doesn't pay a dime, just like a wind farm doesn't pay for the wind. And when the price of something is zero, there is absolutely no economic reason to conserve it.
So what do the economists say we should do about this? Well, their solution is, at least in theory, pretty simple. You put a price on it. You give that environmental resource a real economic value. The idea is that the market will then, theoretically, start to manage it more carefully. As the air gets more polluted or a resource gets more scarce, the price goes up, and that encourages people to conserve.
Now that sounds pretty logical, doesn't it? If you want big companies and governments to pay attention, you just make them pay.
But this leads us to a really big and difficult question. Can we, and maybe more importantly, should we, actually put a price tag on nature?
Let me just ask you this straight up. How much would you pay to save the very last of an endangered species? Or, flip it around, how much money would you need to be paid to be okay with, say, the Grand Canyon just disappearing? The question itself feels kind of ridiculous, right?
And the practical problems here are just massive. For one thing, what someone is willing to pay depends entirely on what they know. And let's be real, that information can be twisted and manipulated by interest groups. And maybe the biggest question of all is, who gets to decide the price? Is it the local people who actually live near a rainforest? Or is it the international community that also benefits from it? It's not just the question of who decides, but also what we even know to begin with.
And that brings us to the final hurdle. And it might just be the biggest one when we're trying to solve the tragedy of the commons on a global scale. It's not just about what we value, it's about what we don't even know we don't know.
Just look at climate change. We know for a fact that human activity is pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But we don't know exactly how the climate will change or what all the knock-on effects will be. We're really just guessing at the full consequences, which means we're also just guessing at the true costs. Our own ignorance is the biggest roadblock of all.
And so, here we are, full circle. The economic argument says, hey, we can solve this whole tragedy thing by putting a price on everything. But that solution leaves us wrestling with a really deep, nagging question. In a world where we're trying to manage our shared resources by slapping a dollar value on them, what happens to the things that are, and maybe should be, priceless?